morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition, and I greet you live from Morrisville, North Carolina, the All-America city in North Carolina, the eighth largest state in the United States. And wherever you are in the world or in the United States, we want to welcome you to the show where we talk about the divisive politics of our time in the U.S., around the world, the post-COVID economy, rising gas prices, inflation, a global recession, Rishi Sunak in the United Kingdom, and of course, a war in Ukraine, and everything going around the world. But today's show is going to be dedicated to the election. Tomorrow, November 8th, are the midterm elections for the United States Congress and the U.S. Senate. And there's a lot at stake here. Control of the Senate, control of the Congress. We will be talking about the Democrats fighting to hold on to power. Right now, Republicans seem to have advantage. Millions have already voted through mail-in ballots, so it could take days to process the results. And everyone's watching closely what this will mean with those, just like in 2020, saying that there's delays and election fraud. The UN Climate Conference started today. The COP27 is being held in Egypt and will run through next week. Last year, countries made ambitious deals about cutting emissions, and this year it's about fulfilling those promises. So we're going to talk about that. And the millions are up in power, are out without power in Ukraine. The blackouts affecting more than 4.5 million people are intentional and meant to stabilize the power grid damage by Russian strikes. And we'll talk about the flu season getting bad. But today, it is my honor to have a very special guest, Brad Crone, a good friend of mine, one of the best political consultants and analysts in the state of North Carolina. He's also run some of my successful winning campaigns, and he runs a company called Campaign Connections. I could be here a long time reading his resume. We also have Courtney Gills, who's running for the U.S. Congress, and Wiley Nickel will be joining us soon. We are having some technical difficulties, but we're going to have Brad on the audio. Brad, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Steve. I apologize. The technology problems are on my side. My camera isn't working this morning. So, there we go with technology.
There you go. Well, we hear your voice, and that's better than nothing. But thank you for being with us, Brad. And a year ago, you and I were fighting hard to get me reelected, and here we are 1 year later. Boy, a year goes fast.
Absolutely.
Brad, so we're going to bring in our guest in a few minutes. But tell us, Brad, what is your crystal ball prediction for tomorrow, November 8th, and its impact on North Carolina, but around the country?
Well, I've been working on a number of independent expenditures and then working on several different campaigns. I'm sort of unique in the state of North Carolina in the sense that I'm unaffiliated consultant. I worked for more than 20 years as a Democrat and changed over as an independent in the 2018 election cycle. So it enables me to work for who I want to. I'm probably a middle of the road centrist Democrat on fiscal policy and a social liberal. And I was raised as a Jim Hunt Democrat. And for those who are listening who don't know Jim Hunt, Hunt served the longest of any of our governors here in the state of North Carolina. So I think just looking at tracking real clear politics, all of the public polls that have been out there, Elon, public policy poll in East Carolina polling, there, I think it's going to be a long night for the Democrats. You look at the voting numbers as far as early vote numbers clearly favor Republicans. That's the first time I can ever remember a situation where early votes actually give an advantage over to the Republicans. But the voters who have turned out so far in early voting in the state of North Carolina are predominantly white, and they're older than 50 years old and older. Top issues that they say coming out of the ballot box are crime and inflation. And I think the Democrats were hoping for a bump with abortion, but it turns out not necessarily so.
So the economy is trumping it. So this could be similar to years like 2010 when I ran for county commissioner, maybe 1994, there was a wave. And of course, the big wave that went really Republican was 84 when even David Price lost. But you think this is going to be one of those things where it's just the economy, inflation, gas prices, is this going to trump even over? What about the bipartisan infrastructure, all these things, democracy under attack? Those messages aren't working for the Democrats.
They really aren't, and that's concerning. And especially when you look at the large number of election deniers on the Republican side running. But this morning, Steve, Real Clear Politics moved North Carolina 13 from a toss-up to leans Republican, and they have now moved North Carolina Congressional District 1 from leans D to a toss-up. So those are the shifting sands that we're seeing in politics. And maybe, I don't know if the Democrats have any type of turnout organization to get votes out tomorrow. The Republicans have always outperformed Democrats on same day, on election day. So it's going to be intriguing to watch. Here in North Carolina, we'll probably see early results come in about 8 o'clock, and then the rest results probably starting to filter in after 10 o'clock.
Okay, great. So we're going to bring in Courtney Gills, who's running for the 4th Congressional. But Brad, stay with us if you don't mind. You have a few minutes with us, Brad, right? Please?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. And Mark Lee will be joining us as well. Courtney, welcome to the show. You're running for the 4th Congressional District against Valerie Fouché, the Democratic nominee. We're going to have Brad provide insight. So, Mark, I'm going to let you drive this and kind of ask Courtney some questions about her campaign, but really want to focus on kind of what we're hearing out there as we,
No problem at all. And everything. One of the questions I was curious about, and definitely glad that a mutual friend of ours had actually told me that they were working with Courtney's campaign. So that's actually when I reached out to her and everything, that being Jan Cromartie. And I did look at her kind of platform and things along those lines. And definitely Jan is like those people like Brad that works for those that are actually on both sides of the aisle and things along those lines. And one of the things that I was noticing that you really put out there, Courtney, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, is, and it's something that Brad just mentioned, is that the economy seems to be a major issue, and it seems to be one of the number one issues that you've been talking about in your campaign. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts around the economy and which way we're going in that direction, and why you feel it is so important, one, to run, because I know that you also come from the nursing field, if I remember correctly, and all in that space. So if you just talk a little bit about your running and maybe some of the things around the economy that are issues that you are putting out there in the forefront.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me on. I am Courtney Gills, and I'm running for the U.S. House District 4, which is that open seat, David Price's seat, and I'm running against Valerie Fouché. And I've been nursing for 10 years, mostly in the emergency room. And in my own career, I've just seen a trend toward where high up at hospital administrators are really starting to prioritize a lot more data analytics and profits over that quality patient care and knowing what the process is at the bedside. So I see costs being cut in medicine really that are not benefiting the patient. And a lot of that is driven by the way Medicaid and Medicare have their regulations set and how the reimbursements are going to happen. And so what I've seen in our federal government is really just this power shift kind of toward the federal government rather than the state level and the people level. And so that's really what motivates me to run. But a lot of times what we see with those kind of what I call power plays, and it doesn't really matter who's in the office of president, it seems like we have a lot of executive orders, a lot of money being spent. Specifically in the past 2 years, there's been a ton of money being spent, but there was really unnecessary stimulus checks sent to a lot of people, including myself, under President Trump. And so we see this in dramatic inflation the past couple of years due to a lot of money expenditures at the federal level. And so I see money and power being tied very much together at the federal level. So my goal is really to bring power down to the people level. And that includes really creating a budget at the federal level and making sure that we're decreasing the debt and not increasing the debt.
Now, Brad Cron, please weigh in here. Courtney, thank you for being with the show. Brad, last week I was with Wiley Nichols, had a guest, Bill Clinton, former president. And I found it interesting to see former President Clinton really talking more about the Democratic message of, the fact that inflation and gas prices are worse. And he talked a little bit about, policies in terms of addressing the debt and deficit. But it was such a different message from a Democrat than what we're hearing today. Do you believe that the Democrats are in this position today because the messaging and communications has just been completely off from the White House? Because
Yeah, no, totally, Steve. And I think, um, Bill Clinton is the last Democrat president who's actually offered a budget that was reconciled. And when he left office, there was actually a surplus in the Treasury, and our national debt was right about $2.7 trillion. And now we're probably approaching $30 trillion. And I agree with Courtney. That's got to be a real concern because it's her generation that's going to end up having to pay for it. So whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, we as a nation must begin talking about fiscal responsibility, or we look at the possibility of having a financial calamity again that will be worse than what we witnessed in the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. And I think we're headed into a recession right now, but I don't think it's going to be steep, nor do I think it's going to be long.
And Courtney's brought out that point about the deficit and those kinds of things. But how do we reconcile everything going on with election deniers? And I mean, I know people, it just seems to me that if you can't honor the outcome of elections, do you really have a democracy that's safe? And so what do you both think about that in terms of I know some people still believe that there was election fraud and the election was stolen, but based on the data that I've seen, there hasn't really been any proof of that. And you have some politicians, including Bo Hines, who, when was asked, will you accept the outcome of the election, he wouldn't answer the question. So he's predicted to win at this point, or at least that's what the polling says. But I just don't understand why. And Courtney, I know you probably are going to accept the outcome of the elections, but what's your take on that as a Republican? With so many, almost 1/3 of the candidates that will win a congressional seat are denying the election result. And Brad, I want you to comment on that as well as an analyst, if you don't mind.
I will do.
Courtney, you're first.
Thank you. So, I mean, I think that term election deniers, we saw that in 2016 as well on the Democrat side. I think anytime, one side wins, there's always people who are questioning the election on either side. But we saw January 6th, and that was completely, against law and order, against anything I believe in, against what I would say most Republicans believe is acceptable behavior. So I always tell people, everything that happened on January 6th, that was completely unacceptable. Any type of rioting is it's against law and order, and it's something that I would never tolerate. But when it comes to election integrity, I think that's something that really should be a bipartisan effort. The fact that people were concerned about interference in the 2016 election. I know Stacey Abrams has spoken in Georgia about feeling like her election at one point was not ran correctly. My husband does data analytics for a living in the financial sector. And so he and I, look very closely at the data, and there are irregularities in North Carolina's data, like the same ID number being voted twice, and one in New Hanover County and one in Durham. So there are situations where I think that we really need to look at controls in our election systems, but from the federal level, I don't think that needs to be addressed. If I'm elected, I would like to always push for transparency and everything, but my whole goal is to bring power to the state level and make sure that every single person feels like their vote counted, feels like the elections were run very smoothly, and that the people were who elected their representatives and their all of their politicians. And so I think that this should be a bipartisan effort, and we should be working together to make sure that everyone feels confident in our elections.
Hey, Courtney, along the same lines.
Let me ask Brad before we bring in our panel. I want to get Brad Krohn's analysis on this, and also Courtney, thank you so much. I also want to get Brad's analysis just in North Carolina, the state Supreme Court, what his prediction is there, and the supermajority, and what lessons can be learned from if the Democrats do lose tomorrow. What advice would you give them to rebuild a playbook? Brad,
first and foremost, let me talk about election integrity in the state of North Carolina. In 2020, there were 5.5 million ballots cast in the state of North Carolina. There were 187 investigations of voter anomaly or irregularity when it came to that. 8 out of 5.5 million votes cast were referred for prosecution and were investigated at the criminal level. 3 were referred for prosecution. One of those out of the 3 who were referred for prosecution was the former White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, who was registered to vote in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the state of North Carolina, and the state of Florida. So, yeah, we have to have election integrity. It is a bipartisan issue. I will say I have worked closely followed the Board of Elections processes and procedures on voter tabulation. Our vote tabulators are not connected to any type of electronic portal. There is no way to hack into a voter tabulator in the state of North Carolina. Can you stuff the ballot box? No, you can't stuff the ballot box because our votes aren't secret. Our votes are private in the state of North Carolina. That means when you walk into a voting precinct, you declare yourself and your party. They pull a ballot barcode from the poll book, attach it to the poll sheet. You sign and verify that you are that person. Then they give you take that ballot sheet to the ballot station and they give you a ballot to vote. That ballot has a barcode on it as well. So if there are 500 people who voted in a precinct, you will have 500 ballot sheets and you will have 500 ballots. You run into problems real quick if your ballot sheets don't reconcile to the counts of your ballot. Every ballot in the state of North Carolina is not only tabulated by OCR, it is scanned. So the Board of Elections can pull your ballot very quickly to see if there are anomalies with that ballot. And then you can actually count by hand once the process on a physical recount, you do a vote by hand. We have probably one of the most secure election systems, I think, in the country that is very easily to reconcile and if you have problems, you can very quickly ascertain where that problem is at and find out what the problem was. So one other real quick, I think the Republicans will take supermajorities in the state House and in the state Senate. And I think the Supreme Court will turn over to be Republican come January 1st.
So what will that mean in terms of, and I'm going to get Courtney back in, and then we're going to bring in our other guests. And Brad, stay with us as long as you can. What does that mean then in terms of congressional maps and North Carolina and abortion and just, I mean, do you really believe Governor Cooper will lose his veto over the supermajority? You're saying
yes.
that.
Yeah, I sure do. We're going to lose races. Democrats will lose races where they should not have lost races. Northeastern North Carolina, for example, in North Carolina District 5 with Howard Hunter III. James Galliard over in Nash County is fighting for his life. Al Applewhite down in Cumberland County running for the State Senate District 19 down there, fighting for her life.
What about Don Davis? What about Don Davis?
I don't think Don wins. I think Sandy Smith will be elected to Congress there.
Sure Jeff Jackson?
Jeff Jackson will win. Kathy Manning will win. But Courtney picked a district that is probably the heaviest Democratic district to run in, but she has fought a very good fight. I have a very good friend in Durham, Marie Josie, who thinks a lot of her and says she's really run a very, very good, positive campaign. So she should be proud of that.
That's great. Well, yeah, great. And
along the same lines, just really quickly, there's a question. Well, actually, we have a couple of questions. One, and
Dan Worthington's here. He wants to come on.
And I want to bring in Dan as well. But one of the things that I've talked about on the network in the past, and I'd love to hear your thoughts around this, Courtney, is I know that there's a lot of political action committees and a lot of kind of those interest groups kind of organizations. And I sometimes get frustrated with our citizenry because I think that they vote, in my mind, a lot just on the notion of what those people are picking for them and all in that space. But I know that they can be very important in the political campaign to get those endorsements, whether it's with the PA or whether it's with the Friends of Durham or a number of the other organizations. But I sometimes wish that our candidates would do more of, not candidates, but the citizens would look more at the actual issues and vote according to what their stances are and how they feel the stances match to their own stances. But I was just wondering your thoughts around that and your thoughts around some of these very powerful political action committees. We know that there are several powerful ones on both sides of the aisle here in North Carolina and all along those lines. But like I said, when I've seen your campaign, there are definitely some things in your viewpoints that I can agree with. There's some other things that I may not have the same views on, and we can get to some of those later on. But I definitely think that it's been a very strong candidacy, and definitely one that people can look at your issues and make their own decisions, and all in that space. But I'm just wondering your thoughts.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. We worked really hard. I've got a lot of people helping me. If I somehow, pull through on this, it was not just my own doing. I have so many people helping me, and I really appreciate that. And it is interesting at the polls, especially in Durham. I have 5 counties, but Durham does have very powerful PACs, and one is the Durham Committee on the Affairs of Black People, and the other one is the People's Alliance. They both have people at every poll passing out slates. So it's the Democrat Party and those two passing out slates that all don't have my name on it. So it's pretty challenging because all my people are having to pretty much, it's like a 3-to-1 argument. And so hopefully voters do read my card and they decide to kind of go off the slate. I hope that they do. And I hope that people will give me an opportunity to represent them. As a nurse, I've really spent my whole career learning to listen to people and assess well and build a relationship quickly and then implement what that person needs. And so I really have done a lot of listening in the past year. I've learned a lot from people in my community about subjects that are not my expertise, but that I've learned a lot and I feel like I can advocate for. So I hope to have that opportunity. But yeah, those political action committees are very powerful. And there has been some situations just in the past couple weeks where they're doing some, blatantly illegal things. You're not allowed to coordinate with a candidate. And so for a little while, they were passing out Foushee for Congress cards that were paid for by Foushee for Congress. And, we made a complaint and they stopped doing that. But it's unfortunate. I don't see that the Republican Party really even tries to stand up in Durham. And I think it's kind of thrown people off that I really am very attentive to detail. And I want things to be done right. I want the voters to be able to decide with free and fair elections, with correct, financial statements where people are following the rules. I'm a rules follower. And so I just ask that people follow the rules and let the voters decide.
Brad Crone, before we bring in Dan Worthington, I know you have to leave in a few minutes, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you real quickly about Donnie Harrison, the Wake County Sheriff. Why does he seem to be doing so well? Do you predict a win for the sheriff to come back? A 16-year sheriff. Donnie Harrison, you think will win?
Yeah, no, I'm working with Donnie, and I've known Donnie my whole life. Again, Steve, it goes back to looking at the early vote. It's predominantly white, older voters. But Sheriff Harrison's run an extraordinary campaign, has raised over 700,000 voters. It's actually been able to get out and meet and talk and organize. The one other interesting thing is the organization that I've seen from the Republican Party in Wake County is unprecedented. I've been working in this business for 31 years, and I've never seen the voter contact, voter engagement, on ground game that the Republicans have. Here in Wake County, for example, they have 6 full-time field directors, 1 field director embedded into Sheriff Harrison's campaign, Donnie's campaign. I'm running a sheriff's race in Pasquotank County for a Democrat, Eddie Graham. And we've seen 3 full-time field directors working up there for the Republicans, helping turn out vote. It makes a difference. Here in Wake County, they've knocked on over 110,000 doors in southern Wake County, northern Wake County, and over in Briar Creek. So the organization that we've seen from an infrastructure standpoint with the Republicans has been unprecedented.
And as a senior member of the city council and a Democrat, but I'm more of a moderate Democrat, I organized my own 4,000 door canvas in 2 days with 10 volunteers of my own. And I actually had more volunteers canvassing and knocking on doors with no support from the Democratic Party of the county, which I found to be very interesting. So it was the most successful canvas I've ever done. And hopefully that'll be good for whatever I do in the future. But I was very surprised. But real quickly, before we Dan, we're not trying to, I know, Brad, you have to leave in a few minutes, right?
Yeah, I've got to jump, but I appreciate it, and I'll get my camera fixed next time.
Okay, my final question before we let Brad go is what is the lesson then? What do the Democrats take away from this if they do lose this big, both at the national level and in North Carolina? Where do they go from here?
They need an economic message that resonates with middle class and working class families. And then they also need to be aware that you can't run away from the crime issue. That the Democrats as a party need to put together a message that makes sure that people feel like that their property and their persons will be protected. And that's a real tightrope for the Democrats to walk. And I think they'll also realize that everybody thought November would be Rovember based on the Dobbs decision. That necessarily hadn't played out. So,
Yeah.
And then finally, just infrastructure. The Democrats are woefully inadequate when it comes to infrastructure on actually running a campaign. And we're going to see that from Sherry Beasley all the way down to the state house level and county commissioner level. And so they've really got to take the next 2 years to build out a turnout machine that can equal what the Republicans are doing on the ground.
Okay. Well, Brad Crone, thank you for your time. We wish you well tomorrow, and we'll be bringing him. We want to bring Brad Crone back, actually, maybe more frequently, and he's agreed to do that. Brad, thank you so
That'll
much.
be great.
Have a great day.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate you.
We're going to continue. Dan Worthington, you've been very patient, so please, the floor is yours to bring up any insights or concerns and have a discussion with Courtney.
Well, I think one of my observations is that on a number of the issues that the progressives are undermining the traditional Democratic Party in significant ways because of the need of the Democrats to caucus and do all the things they do to get their votes. The progressives have far more sway than they should have. Just look at Biden's energy policy. And that was entirely swayed, just to get him elected, was entirely swayed by the New Green Deal and OAC and the radicals on the left. And it's destroyed our economy because we were energy independent, and now we are energy dependent on a number of foreign countries that want to do us harm. And it just doesn't make any sense. Plus, in light of the Ukraine deal, it's really been a failure on the part of the Democratic leadership. On crime, they've been extremely soft because of the progressives and because of their message of letting the criminals out and recommit crimes. And it's just wrong. Law and order needs to be law and order. Right needs to be right. All the name calling by the Democrats and the labeling of election deniers is just that. It's just labeling people. Like Courtney said, the Democrats were election deniers in 2016, and they could have been labeled that. That didn't really matter. We all know the truth about the so-called insurrection. Even the FBI said it wasn't an insurrection. We also remember the mostly peaceful demonstrations in all the major cities and the destruction of all the property and billions of dollars in damage by the progressives and their minions. And I think we need to take a step back and become more moderate in our ways and try to strive for center in our politics without destroying our traditional values and constitution, which is the thing that really is at play here. The Democrats say, oh, well, the Republicans should try to destroy the Constitution. That's not true. The traditional values of the Constitution are the patriotic values of the Constitution. The Democrats are the ones undermining the traditional Constitution by trying to reinterpret it, trying to change it, trying to shove it in our faces and censor everyone and mess everything up. I think it's just absolutely repugnant what both sides are doing to each other, and it makes the American people very unhappy with one another. I hope Trump doesn't run again. He likely will. I think that would not be good for our country. His policies were good, and the policies were working for America. So someone like DeSantis would be a better choice because he doesn't stick his foot in his mouth quite as often, or he doesn't stick his foot in his mouth. He's still strong on the same kinds of policies that President Trump was strong on. It's just that President Trump made a poor poster boy for the American patriot and American patriot dream because of his prior corruption. But now you got Biden in there with his son and their corruption, right?
Wiley Nichols waiting for the link, Mark. If you could resend it to him, he didn't.
I will resend it to him. I sent it to him before, but I'll definitely send it again. And while I'm doing that, Courtney, one of the things that I really admired about your campaign and still do admire and everything is the way that you were addressing some very touchy issues. And actually, Dan alluded to one of them, which is the notion of the fairness in sentencing and the criminal justice system, as well as gun rights. So I'd love to hear you. Maybe you're expounding a little bit here on this platform about that, because that is something that I saw that you were quite interested in and that you are concerned about and all along those lines. But I'd love to hear your thoughts and not try to put it just in the words that I got from the page of yours, your campaign page.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I think that, my fellow Republicans are not very good at addressing this issue because, some things get so blown out of proportion. When we do talk about crime is one of the probably number one issues, especially in Durham, where the significant portion of my population in my district is. But most people want law and order. They want funding for police. They want funding for military. My opponent has voiced both of those at different times in her career, that she would decrease funding for both of those. But most people want to know that when they call 911, the police are coming. I had someone from my staff call 911 just for a fender bender a couple months ago, and there was no answer from 911. They got a call back an hour later. So you think if that was an emergency, how bad that would have been to not have an answer from 911. So we have holes all throughout our emergency system with EMS, with police, with the 911 system in Durham. And we need to make sure that we have that infrastructure so that people are protected. But specifically legislatively, because that's where I'm going, the crime bill of 1994 was a Democrat bill. It was mostly related to violent crime, but that's the one that is referred to as the 3 strikes and you're out. If you have a certain weight of certain drugs, 3 times you can be put into prison for life. I've talked to constituents just in my district that have family that are currently in prison for 16, 18 years for this specific bill. And I just want to look at legislatively, like, does the punishment fit the crime? If you're not having a violent crime sentencing, why are we putting people in for life in prison? That just doesn't seem to fit. And then what are we doing for these people as they're moving out of prison? Are we giving them resources to know how they can go into the real world? Are we helping them with housing? Because a lot of people can't find housing. A lot of people can't get jobs. Do we have social workers working with these people to find businesses that are willing to employ felons? We need to have these things set up so that we don't have just reoccurring people breaking the law, because most people want to add to society. Most people want a job. Most people want the hope. So I want to look at kind of all parts of this system legislatively with law enforcement and just advocating for my constituents where they are.
Well, that makes sense. The other question I had to ask you, and actually Kimberly had alluded to it, and by the way, Kimberly is one of our fellow founders of the network and all along those lines, and I know that it can be a touchy subject and all in that space, but she was wondering kind of your views around abortion, because as we mentioned earlier, there were some folks that were thinking that this was going to be like a because of the Dobbs decision, that we were going to see a lot of women coming out to vote and that they were going to vote in mass, but for the Democrats because of the Roe decision and all along those lines. But I know that you are definitely adamantly pro-life and all along those lines, and I can definitely respect that. But I was just wondering your thoughts around the abortion laws and just that kind of thoughts. Like I said, Kimberly, along with Nick, is one of the founders of the network, and she was asking you that question as well.
Sure. Yes, I am pro-life in my own views. I think what we see with the current Democrat Party at the federal level, there was a decision made. It was right when the leak happened, not when the official decision was made with Roe v. Wade, but there was a legislation that was pushed about 3 months ago that was codifying abortion up until birth or 40 weeks. And 49 out of 50 Democrat senators voted yes. Manchin voted no, said that was too far along. So if you talk to the general public, most people, their hangups are rape, incest, and the woman's life. And I have said countlessly to many people that I would be happy to sign that legislation, even though it doesn't completely match my convictions. I think it does get rid of that whole abortion for birth control reasons. I want to make sure that women do have access to birth control. I want to make sure I'm protecting the woman's life. I tell people I am pro-life in every single circumstance. I want to make sure I'm protecting the baby's life. I want to protect the mom's life. I want to protect elderly life. A lot of this this pro-choice movement is moving toward, when you guys are talking about progressives, there is a movement toward the choice of euthanasia with elderly. And
Right.
is that even going to be a choice when it comes to a lot of people in skilled nursing facilities? We already see a decreased quality care and funding for skilled nursing facilities for elderly people. Are we going to get to the point where we're euthanizing people who have low quality of life because it's a pro-choice movement, and the people who are their power of attorney, do they get to make that decision? At what point do we draw the line with the choice movement? I want to make sure I say that I am very adamant about protecting the woman's life, something like ectopic pregnancy, sepsis uterus. There's a lot of things as a nurse. I know there's a lot of people I know how to reference and get the correct information to make sure bills are written properly, but I do not want this legislated from the federal level. I think it needs to stay at the state level. I stick to the Constitution that whatever power not specifically designated to the federal level to be given to the states. But if I had to vote on it, I would have to vote pro-life, but I would be pro-life in all of those circumstances.
No, that makes a
Right.
lot of
Good
sense.
job.
Is Wiley Nickel here yet? We want to give him.
Wiley is here, and I just had one more quick question for
Yeah, one
Courtney
last
and
question
everything.
for Courtney, and we'll let her go. But
And
thank
then
you,
I know
Courtney,
she's
for
got a
being
bounce
with us.
as well. But my one question for Courtney is, there's been a lot of divisiveness in the campaign. One of the things that I admired about you, like I said, is that you definitely seem to be reaching across the aisles, and I've seen others that have tried to reach across the aisles as well. That's one of the things I actually admire about Steve, is that he reaches across the aisles as well. But I was just wondering your thoughts about, and in my mind, it's on both sides of the political aisle, this divisive nature that is going on in our ads. I'm seeing ads that are even trying to pit different ethnic groups against each other and all along those lines. So I just wondered your thoughts around this kind of divisive, something new, or is it something that's always been going on and that we just need to try to fight against? But I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's really sad. I mean, I would say I have Republicans that support me, I have independents that support me, Democrats. Nobody likes that stuff. Nobody likes people just talking negatively about somebody else. They want to know what you're going to do for them. I mean, even Joe Biden, in one of his speeches recently, he said, "What are Republicans for?" So I've heard that, and I've thought, I want people to know what am I for, and what do I want to do for people. And so all these negative ads just talking negatively about somebody else, people naturally go, "Well, what makes you any better?" And I think that everybody sees this all over my literature, all over my website, that I really built my platform on truth, justice, and unity in America. And I think where we've gone wrong with unity is that we've pushed unity on people that feel like they don't really know what's true anymore. Everybody watches different types of media. We all have so much information on our phones. People are obsessed with Twitter. People like arguing. It's a problem. And so we need to really be able to go back to truth. And I've had some really great conversations, even at the polls with Democrats, that we really are able to have these great conversations about what do we all really believe deep down, and what is true. And I think if people can calm down and talk about what is truth and what do we all agree on, and how can we really work together for the betterment of society and justice, and then we'll see more unity if we're able to sit down and really talk about what's true.
Courtney, we thank you for being with us, and we will wish you well tomorrow. And it's been a pleasure having you. We're going to be bringing on our next congressional guest, but thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for running a positive campaign. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
With us now, we have Senator Wiley Nickel. Senator,
I can't hear Steve.
Hello?
I know he's talking. I see his lips moving.
It's good to be with you today, Steve.
Mark, can you hear me?
I hear you, and I hear Wiley as well.
Okay, good. Well, we can't see Wiley, but we got him on the audio, unless he can get his camera to work on the phone. But
I can't hear Wiley.
Welcome. So everyone, I introduce you to Wiley Nickel in one of the toss-up seats, the 13th Congressional. He's been a state senator for a number of years, representing North Carolina in the Senate 16. He worked for President Obama and is an advance person for President Clinton. And who hosted an event for him last week. So Wiley, welcome to the show, and tell us how are things looking right now, and a little bit for our guests and panel on why you're running for Congress.
Yeah, Steve, it's great to be with you. Thanks so much for having me here. Things are looking great in this 13th district. We have got one of the most competitive races for Congress in the country. It's a seat that was drawn by the courts to be 50-50 right down the middle. And that's what we're seeing. The best part about a seat like this is the best ideas win. And if you're a far-right extremist like my opponent, you're going to get rejected at the ballot box. And that's what we're seeing in this race. But folks are struggling, and we need to do all we can to help. And that's what our campaign's been about: solutions. doing everything that we can to help
And,
bring
I'm gonna,
down.
and
Awesome.
Dan, you laughed, but I mean, honestly, Wiley is well respected by Republicans and independents in this district, and he is running against someone who's never had a job, and Bo Hines is really an extremist. So Dan, I know you're in favor of moderates, but Wiley Nickel is a moderate, and I think that hopefully we can get.
Yeah, I just don't like people labeling other people far right extremists.
But Bo Hines
I
is a
don't know the
far-right.
other. I don't know the other guy. I've never heard it. And you know, Wiley's probably a great guy and everything. All this labeling just has me turned off. All this stuff about far right this, far right that.
Well, Dan, when you deny the results of the last election,
Well, and that's the other thing, the election denier thing. Yeah, it's all a label. I mean, look what Democrats did in 2016. They were deniers, but they weren't labeled that way. I mean, there are a whole bunch of people that thought there were irregularities with the election, me included, that aren't election deniers. And that whole thing, you know as well as I do, Wiley.
Dan, I'll
that
let
whole
you
thing.
speak when it's your turn, but I was talking when you interrupted me. Are we
Oh,
doing?
I'm sorry. No, he asked me a question. I
Yeah,
answered.
Dan, let's be respectful to our guests and let the senator finish. So, Senator, continue to finish, please.
Thanks, Steve. You know, we've been running a campaign about the issues, and on the other side, all we hear are attacks on the economy and plans to cut Social Security and Medicare. But in this race, it's your choice, and voters are going to make, send a message with this race that we're tired of far right extremists like my opponent, and that's what we've been seeing at great early vote results, and we're excited about what's going to happen tomorrow night.
Just along those same lines.
And Wiley's getting a lot of support from Republicans. Wiley's getting you are getting a good amount of support from Republicans in your district, which I find to be interesting. Republicans that are actually in favor of somebody that I think you're really looking at experience to represent us in Congress. And so, I mean, I know we often joke about Congress, but I do think it's helpful to have a job before you go there. And this candidate has never had a job. Is that correct? He's 26.
Yeah. This would be his first job ever being a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. So we're running on my record as a state senator, working across the aisle to deliver results for my community. And that's what's been resonating with folks in the 13th district.
What do you want to go ahead? What do you want to do when you get to Congress if you win?
You know, number one, we've got to protect the right to vote and the right to choose. Those issues are on the ballot in this race in a way that we haven't seen in quite a long time. You know, I want my daughter to have the same rights that her mother has had for the last 50 years. And in this race, we get to protect women's rights. We get to protect the right to vote. And, you know, as you know, Steve, democracy is on the ballot in this race. You know, we have a far right extremist who has said, you know, he's 100% pro-Trump. He wants to go to Congress to be a quote unquote MAGA warrior. You know, that's not going to work for folks in the 13th district. But, you know, we're out there doing all we can to get out the vote. We're at the point now in this election where it's just about getting out and voting and encouraging everyone to do that. And for anyone who's listening and hears the sound of my voice, you know, need them to know tomorrow is election day. Get out there and make your voice heard. But Steve, we've got a number of other things I've got to jump to.
No, Wiley, just really quickly. This is Mark.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Senator.
Good
luck tomorrow.
Thanks. Take care.
Yeah.
So that's been great. We've had a really great run of analysts today. Brad Crone, Courtney Greer, Wiley Nickel, and Dan, you brought up some good points. I mean, I think you're right. I agree with you. I don't think we should maybe get away from using labels across the thing and start looking at these races. But you know, I actually.
Well, I mean, I'm concerned that the guy hasn't had a job. I mean, that's weird. You know what he did before all this?
He did nothing. He played football, went to Yale, and graduated, and didn't work. And then he was just recruited.
Oh well, but he did go to Yale, and he did graduate, and he did play football. I mean, that's something, right? He's how old a fellow is he?
He's like in his 20s. He's in his 20s.
Well, that explains it. He's
okay, but
young.
You know.
So the name calling isn't exactly warranted. The fact he hasn't quote unquote had a job yet.
But I think some experience. I mean, regardless of whether you're Republican or Democrat, I think some experience is important.
Well, I'll let you know, Steve. You know, it's like I worked my way through school the entire time, and so you know, I learned more from the work experience than I did school. And I've got you know, for advanced degrees. And so it's not like people enter into graduation from school in a void. They've got life experiences. I mean, this fellow evidently has some values that reflect the right side of the political spectrum. I don't know who he is, but certainly the name calling doesn't help me. I mean, what Wiley told me in his conversation was just as slanted, and I mean, it's just wrong. I mean, he shouldn't be using that kind of rhetoric in a campaign. I don't care. It turned me off as a person. I mean, I wouldn't vote for him just because of the name calling. So,
Yeah, no, I think that's, you know,
just to Steve, just to be fair, because I did look it up on the Ballotpedia and everything. If folks are interested, Hines did actually intern for an Indiana governor. It was actually a Republican governor. That was Eric Holcomb, and he also did intern for U.S. Senator Mike Rounds and all of that. And you are correct. It is his first run for political office, and his actual campaign ad, and I'm just going to put it out there since we did have Wiley, that his campaign ad said, North Carolinians deserve a leader who puts in the hours like we do, fighting inflation, creating jobs, and standing up to Joe Biden and protecting North Carolina values. Like I said,
I've had the honor of hearing him speak, and I was, just to be, as someone that's a lawyer and a business executive and an elected leader, I was so unimpressed with his lack of knowledge on the issues of any matter. I will just say that, you know, I think it's really ridiculous that somebody that, I don't even care if he was a Democrat, when you're 26 years old and you don't know the ways of the world, I don't think you're ready to go and do the business of the nation. And I don't care whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. He's a kid. And, you know, I think that if he does win, you know, it was because of Trump's endorsement, but there is no way that this guy has the, and I would say the same thing for Wiley while he was running. I mean, Wiley was been a state senator. He's worked for administrations. He's well respected across both sides of the aisle in the North Carolina Senate, and he's actually gotten some good things done. He's got a record that he can do in Congress. So I hope Dan Worthington is right. Maybe it's time to get it off the labels, but I would like these candidates to come in and talk about, okay, what is your experience? How are you going to manage these billions of dollars coming in? And I think Bo Hines is a perfect example of someone that was recruited that has absolutely no experience and, quite frankly, no business being in the United States Congress.
But the flip side of that, Steve, just if I can just add some inputs and everything, the flip side of that, and like I said, some people say that I'm probably playing devil's advocate and all in that space, but I definitely believe in fairness. I think that's one of the things that Dan admires about me and everything is that there have been folks that are definitely on the other side as well. And as Dan was talking about the progressives, and I don't agree with everything he said about the progressives, but there are folks that you could say that same thing about them, and they have definitely come into office. And sometimes when they're in office, they have upset the apple cart. But I mean, we could say the same thing about AOC. AOC was a bartender when she first came to office, and all along those lines. And
that's true. But I would make the same standard for her as well. And I would tell you that I don't think she's been as an effective. I'll say this as a Democrat. I'm not a supporter of AOC. I don't think she's been productive in terms of doing that. And and it's not so much being a bartender, but I call me old school. I think, you know, if whether you're Republican or Democrat, we need economists, we need business leaders, we need executives, we need people that have the government experience. You know, and so that's just my opinion. But Lee, you've been quiet. What are your thoughts about all this?
I'm just going to follow up on you were saying, Steve. We need people experience. You're saying government experience or private business experience. There's a big difference.
Either one is
I
fine.
I understand what you're saying. I just don't see politicians having a monopoly on being competent in the way they serve the public.
And
exactly opposite. Yeah, exactly opposite.
Yeah.
And Lee, along those same lines, and I'd love to hear Nick's thoughts about this, but I think that it needs to be a mixture of both. So like I said, I don't have a problem with somebody that is young and green, as some people would use that term, being in the leadership. I mean, we have a show that's on Tuesdays, and the young lady's in her early 40s, but she's very good at what she does in the metaverse space and all along those lines. So she is actually somebody that would be considered a youth leader. So I don't have any problem with the youth leaders bringing a different voice, because I do think that we need to hear from them as well. And I'm saying this as the man that's 60 years old and just turned that on July 1st, but I think that we need to hear some of their voices also, but not necessarily just the voices of those that are seasoned in industry. I think Courtney's actually relatively young as well, and definitely she is running as a Republican and a conservative Republican. But some of the views that she's bringing up, I would have no problem with her being my representative. Does that mean I'm voting for her? Well, I'm not going to necessarily put out one way or the other whether I am or I'm not, but definitely, if she wins, I can definitely be supportive of her as a candidate and somebody in that office. But don't you think that there needs to be a balance in that? Because we've even seen that in organizations, like some of those PACs that we were talking about. They are oftentimes run by folks that are senior level, and when the young people bring in their views, they are kind of squashed. And I think that there needs to be a balance where we are getting the wisdom of the folks that are older, but also getting some of the fresh ideas from the young people. And I think Congress should be the same way. And that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, I think, well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. A couple of things we didn't talk about. So the
I think in the
climate
House,
against
that's true.
Egypt.
You know,
What?
the House is, kind of the community of ideas of the younger, and there people are supposed to come in and out of there. It's more of a representative body. The Senate is supposed to be more deliberate and experienced. The people in the Senate are supposed to be more deliberate and experienced, and I think that's sort of the balance, at least in my view.
I thought Courtney Gills, Steve, was very impressive. She had command of the issues, and she was not inflammatory. With all that said, that doesn't mean she's going to get elected. And it's really sad because I think the real problem is she'll probably quit if she doesn't get elected, as opposed to she's actually very good. I concur with Dan. You know, the inflammatory language is not well represented. You know, to start immediately calling names. But I also do see on the other side this thing, and Danson doesn't live here. This has been a cesspool of politics because you see what Bo Hines does. Wiley is a criminal defense attorney. So every time he defends a criminal, and his ads go, well, you are the criminal. Okay. I mean, that's what the ads really imply. It's the ads that Bo Hines put out are defamatory, slanderous, libelous. On the other side, it's a cesspool there too, but Dan doesn't get to see the other cesspool. So what you have in that district, whatever it is a mudslinging contest.
Mudslinging coming from either side. Yeah.
The best thing that I saw today was your political analyst coming in and talking about election fraud, and he had command of the numbers. In other words, 5 million votes, 2 million. They reviewed, I don't know, several million of these things, and they found 8 instances of voter fraud. Do you know, I have never seen in 2 years on media somebody that actually had command like he did of the election fraud issue.
Yeah, he's a good analyst. And I also liked his Ahmad. He was also, I thought,
he was great.
Really great. I like the fact that he's an independent consultant, right, guys? I mean, I think that was really nice. So he could speak to both the, why the Republicans are doing, why the Democrats. I think, that was a really great analyst, not coming in with any kind of preset notions. And he just laid it out. I mean, honestly, hearing from Brad Crone, who, I think he's great. He not only laid out why the Democrats he thinks are going to lose, but he laid out what they need to do to get back. Yeah. But I think he focused on the ground game, and at the end of the day, that's where you win wars on the ground. And I think that it may come down to that. But I thought this was one of the best analysts we had, and I hopefully everybody appreciated it. I'm going to give him that positive feedback. But he was willing to even he said kind things about Courtney and. Who's a Republican running. I was impressed with her as well. I'd like to see more positive candidates off both sides running, both Republican and Democrat, where we have a discussion on our differences of opinion of the direction of the country and let the voters decide, rather than this constant name slinging and the gerrymandering and, let's go in there and slice up the seat so we win 2 more. I mean, the games. And I would say the same thing for Democrats, right? I think that we have to get even the Democrats won the House and Senate in North Carolina. They would do the same. They would go draw the districts in their favor, right? So the problem is the way the system is. I don't understand how legislatures can do that. I mean, I think that's part of the problem. Fair districts, fair maps, and let the people decide, right? What's wrong with that?
Yeah. And the other problem is the media doesn't give these people enough time to actually discuss or flush out the issues. It's not everybody should have like at least an hour to explain their positions on various different issues. We make our decisions as voters based on two things. Number one, you recognize their name. Number two, the mud that's been slung, but nothing on the real hardcore facts and plans of what these people are going to do. So we really have a system that's very poor when it comes to how the media brings politicians to people's lives. And that's one reason, even on this whole thing with election fraud, I finally got to listen to a guy who was intelligent about it. If you listen to any of the major networks, all you listen to is voter fraud, no voter fraud, voter fraud, no voter fraud. But no one has any command of the data. This guy actually brought command to the data. So I thought it was
definitely, he definitely brought command to the data, but isn't part of the problem, and I'd love to hear maybe Lee's thoughts around this, is that, and I kind of agree with what Nick was saying, is that if you're going to make your votes, a lot of folks make their votes based on those pamphlets that they're handed out sometimes way before the election and all in that space, or they're off of the TV ads. And I don't think personally that there are enough debates. And I also wish that the debates would be more properly moderated and all of that, because I do think that sometimes the debates are a free-for-all and they're not properly moderated and all in that space. Because like as you see, I think you can be fair in letting people present both of their sides and everything. I'm actually nominating myself. So Lee, the next time that you do a debate with one of your candidates, I will moderate for you as well as whoever you're going.
My pleasure to have you.
Do you even need to do a debate? Just have them give an hour presentation on their positions. Don't have
Nick,
this debate, because the debate is a circus. Have somebody spend an hour giving their opinions on these various different issues, and forget this whole debate circus, because that's all it is. I
Nick,
mean,
isn't
do
the meeting,
but do that later. Make sure that you get their opinions without through a phony debate.
We didn't get
Nick, I'm sorry.
Well, tomorrow we'll be talking about the election results if we know them, and we'll also be talking about things we didn't get to today. Climate summit, which began today in Egypt. We'll talk about that. The blackouts in Ukraine, which is concerning to many, and a post-election world. Now, once this is over, we'll have to get back to governing, and maybe the only silver lining I can see in the cloud is that, if Kevin McCarthy does become the speaker, and they do win control of the Senate, will there be ways that President Biden can work with these Republicans and continue to get things done for America, which is fighting inflation, fighting gas prices? So hopefully we can put the politics behind us and I think all of us agree we want what's best for the U.S. economy. And the thing is, things are better here in the U.S. than around the world, but definitely not to where they need to be. So, hopefully it'll be, if it is a gridlock government, it would be a Democratic White House, Republican House and Senate. Hopefully they can figure out common ground and work together on some things. That's all we can hope for. Right.
Agreed. You had a question, Lee, and then I think you got to do your closeout.
I was just following up on what Nick was saying about candidates getting out there in the public and getting with the media. Is it the media's fault for not offering, or is it the candidate's fault for not putting themselves out there enough, making their positions and their names known? Because a lot of candidates, I think, only want to go on friendly media, and for whatever reason, media likes to have a free for all and what they get you in interviews and what have you, as opposed to just tell me who you are and put yourself out there. They want the sound bites and stuff like that, which is more important to them, unfortunately, than the reality and just, who are these people?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, folks, we're getting ready for closeout. No major monologue in that. If you are listening in the United States, please get out to vote. Most polls open up at 6 a.m, open until 7:30. Check your local board of elections or state board of elections if you want to vote. Some rules are different. In North Carolina, if you haven't received or mailed in your ballot, you can drop it off, but don't go to a polling site with your absentee ballot. You need to go to the board of elections and do that. We wish everyone all the best tomorrow at the polls. Hopefully it'll be civil and respectful, and hopefully results that the American people can accept and move on. We have not heard from President Biden. I'm sure we'll hear from him later today during these elections. And We will be joining us soon on Economics Monday. I'll be joining in right around when David M. Walker will be getting on the show to talk about different issues. But from our family to yours on Roku TV, we wish you all the best. May the light and love of our hearts always lift us out of darkness wherever you are. And tomorrow is game day in the United States midterm elections. Get ready, get out your popcorn. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be fun. And hopefully tomorrow night we will have the results, or in a few days after that. Thank you all so much. This is Steve Rouse signing off on Roku World TV, World Edition, Roku TV, Pod TV. Thank you.